Greetings and welcome to another edition of Montpelier Connection. I'm State Representative Mike Mrowicki from Putney, and I represent the Windham-4 District of Putney, Dummerston, and Westminster. We're having another show today looking at the issues and concerns that we'll be dealing with in the 2016 legislative session. We're pushing on November pretty hard, and January is going to be here before we know it. So one of the things I want to share from the start is we want to hear from you. We want to hear what your questions are, what your suggestions are, and this is the time to do it. Today's guest is Chloe Learey, and Chloe is the director of the Prouty Center here in Brattleboro. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks for taking the time. I know you are busy, like everyone who works with kids and families, and you're doing a lot of great work there. Let's assume for a minute, though, that not every viewer is aware of what Prouty has been doing or hopes to be doing in the future. So let's start with, what is the Prouty Center? Who does it serve? What are the kind of things you do?
Absolutely. And actually, you're not far off the mark. There are many people in Brattleboro who have no idea what we do. And some people who thought we went away when we left the corner of Oak Street and High Street. So we're still around, and we're doing a lot of work. We have an early learning center, so we have children currently from 14 months through age 5, about 50 kids in the early learning center. And then we also provide children's integrated services. So the state of Vermont, in serving families with young children, wanted it to be a seamless process. So what that means is we provide early intervention to families with children with a developmental delay, 0 to 3. We have nursing. We have family support, which is sort of like a social work case management. And then we collaborate with HCRS for early childhood family mental health and with Windham Child Care for specialized child care services. So there's a group of collaborative providers in the community who come together to provide these services, and we're part of that collaborative.
Yeah. Now that's great when families can get services, but you serve all families, right?
We do. That is a great question. Thank you. We serve all families. Our origins were as one of the first preschools in the country to serve kids with special needs in a preschool setting. And so that history and foundation is important in the sense of we are informed by being inclusive. So we believe that children belong where children belong. So we definitely have a mission to make sure that we serve children with special needs. And all of our services are available to anybody. And in fact, our model wouldn't work if it wasn't open to everybody, because it's really important for us to have that representation from our community.
Yeah.
So.
Now, when you talk about children's integrated services, the idea years ago when we created that was that the energies and resources would not be diffuse and shooting all over the place. It sounds like it's working. From your perspective, is this the way to go? It
absolutely has been a wonderful thing in our community, because what it means is there's no wrong door to access services. So before, you might have had to go to one provider to get an intake through mental health, for instance, or nursing was provided by the VNA, or come to the Prouty Center for early intervention. Now families can call one number, the Prouty Center, and if we can't help, then we will absolutely find a way and help connect families to that service. So no wrong door, and one really good door to access services. Yeah. I think also it's allowed for flexibility. So rather than families having to be eligible for certain specific services, there are some eligibility criteria for early intervention. For instance, you have to have a developmental delay or be at risk. However, if you're not eligible for that, somebody else can help you. So I think it's just made it a lot easier for families to support families earlier, so that they have what they need to be successful.
Yeah. On a previous show, we were focusing on recovery and talking about addiction, mental health. One of the startling statistics we learned last year as we were doing research for legislation are the number of children now that are being born into addicted families, the number of infants the state is removing from those families, the number of children that grandparents are having to raise now because the parents are either in jail, in recovery, or in rehab, or active in their addiction. Is this something you're seeing in the landscape that you're serving?
Yes, we are absolutely touched by the number of families who are struggling with addiction and accessing services. So we have the family support aspect of Children's Integrated Services, for instance. We probably have 26 to 30 families on that caseload, quote unquote, and actually more than that. It's probably closer to 40, and then probably 2/3 of them are involved with family services somehow, often because of an addiction issue. So it's not a matter of, and in Brattleboro alone, we have over 100 children in custody in our family services district. So even though this is the one thing that has not been successful about Children's Integrated Services, it is meant to be a prevention and early intervention program so that we can get there early, get people what they need, help them be successful. Most of our families, honestly, are in crisis, or a big chunk of them. So we do the best we can with what we have, but it's hard. And then you throw in other variables that if you're homeless, if you're trying to make sure you have enough food, these are concerns that if you can't get those taken care of, you can't really. It's harder to work on your addiction issues. So that is absolutely the kind of work we're trying to do with families.
Yeah, I think it's a real life example of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that if you can't take care of those basic needs, the other stuff is not going to happen, or it makes it that much harder. So,
and actually, another program that the Prouty Center has been doing for the past couple of years is family supportive housing. So, there's a plan to end family homelessness by 2020. I don't know if people have seen that, but it's a great initiative that the state is focusing on. And so this program is focused on families with young children right now. It was a pilot in 3 regions, and we were one region. And it's really helped, even though we did some housing work, that program has really helped us sort of see that whole continuum and collaborate with other partners more broadly, because again, if you don't have a home, or if you're struggling with that continuity, it's hard to get anything else in place.
Yeah, you bet, especially for kids.
Right, it's a hard one.
Yep.
So
yeah. Now, does any of that work touch with what Josh Davis is doing over at Groundworks?
Yes, we collaborate with Groundworks a lot. And in fact, there are many different housing forums in the community. One of them is the Continuum of Care. So monthly there's a group of people, Groundworks, SEVCA, Brattleboro Housing Partnership, Windham-4 Rep Housing Trust, all the partners who do housing sort of come together and talk about what can we do. So that's one forum where we regularly collaborate with them. But really around housing families, it's a tricky. So for instance, families in the overflow shelter. So it's great that we have the overflow shelter again this winter, starting November 15th, I think is the hope.
At the Baptist Church.
At the Baptist Church again, right. We were gonna have an overflow shelter. It's just we weren't sure where it was gonna be. So it's not a great place for families with young kids. Yep. So on those kinds of issues, we really try to work with other community providers around how do we support homeless families who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, I've heard from a number of people who say, why don't you just do what they're doing in Utah with the Housing First model, where you take the extra housing that's not being used. And as I think you know, there isn't extra housing here in Vermont, especially in Brattleboro.
No, we have a less than 1% vacancy rate in our community. So even people who have great track records
with money have trouble.
Housing, so. But at Housing First, I think, and certainly philosophically in the community, I think we try to rally around that notion, or keep putting that at the forefront. That if we keep creating barriers, and this, I would offer this isn't even just for housing, but maybe even accessing benefits. There are hoops to jump through and phone calls to make. You have to call the shelter every day if you're homeless to get on the list, to stay on the list, because that's one of those. So anyway, and this is why I think CIS is a good model for how do you help people. How do you walk with them and partner with them and meet them where they are and try to move forward instead of imposing or, having a sort of, paternalistic approach, which actually doesn't help people get better. So Housing First, we're not doing it, quote unquote, but it's certainly something that many providers talk about or philosophically try to think about.
Yeah.
So.
And I agree that you're on the right track by working with the whole family. When kids get in systems, we can help kids. If the family's still struggling, though, it means that the child is going to still struggle. And it's one of the things that I've noticed, and it's one of the biggest challenges is breaking the cycle of generational poverty. one of the pieces that I see that connects the dots from generation to generation is trauma. And is that something you see in the families you're working with, and are there ways we can help them address their trauma, move it into healthy ways, or move it into ways that they can be more healthy about how they interact with themselves and others?
You're right that trauma sort of helps reinforce the generational nature of poverty. And there's certainly a lot of training and awareness right now about having trauma-informed services. So making sure that you're sensitive to where somebody's coming from and how you might interact in a way that helps move beyond that. I think some of the challenges are that continuum of care around mental health. So that's something we always work with from a very young age, to at least in our community. And so getting people access to those services. But again, it's that balance of if you you have to get to appointments. You have to make your appointment. If you don't, then you get off the list. So again, how to make it accessible and usable in a way that's friendly. One of the things, this is a little bit of a tangent. One of the initiatives that I'm really excited about, it's not the Prouty Center per se, but from the work that we're doing, one of our nurses, our CIS nurses, Sally Pennington, has been talking for all the years she's been at Prouty about maternal depression. We have got to help moms and their postpartum depression. So finally, what's happened is a group of providers from HCRS to the health department to the retreat have been coming together and have put together a maternal depression work group. It's actually perinatal depression because it talks about before birth and after birth. And has started support group. It's not really a support group, but a place for women to come who've just had a baby, and talking with clinicians about, can you do some home-based, is there an opportunity for home-based visits while you're working to get somebody to the office? But if you think about being depressed, I can't even get out of my house. So that kind of sort of flexibility and creativity, I think, is some of the ways that we'll get at how do we make it accessible for people.
It's a good point. There's a lot of talk about children not coming to school ready to learn. And what we're not talking about is these kids don't know how to read and write yet. We're talking about some of these other aspects of development. And there's a study I saw last year which said the social competencies are one of the greatest predictors of later success.
Yes.
So I think we need to forget about testing well. We need to forget about kids being able to read or write at the age of 3 or 4 or even 5. But the whole range of developing the whole child. That's what you're talking about, isn't it?
Absolutely. And thinking about, we have a kindergarten readiness survey in Vermont. It currently shows that almost half of our kindergartners aren't ready for kindergarten. What does that mean? It's important to look at that tool and understand it, and sort of see that whole range of development and take the whole perspective. Some of the questions on that are, do you think the child is getting enough to eat? Do you think they're getting enough sleep? So I appreciate that it's at least broadening it to that point of view. But if and it's a big topic right now in terms of Act 166, and are we going to pay for preschool, and what age do we start? Because if 80% of your brain is developed by 3 and 90% by 5, and we don't even go to school until 5, we've missed 0 to 3 is so critically important. So,
well, that leads me to some language difficulties that some people have here. What are we calling what? Some of us say from birth to age 2 is childcare, and some people are saying it's all early education. How do we find a framing that everybody can understand what we're talking about? Because there's some practitioners themselves who are using different language to describe the same thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's one of those things that I think makes it hard sometimes to see early childhood as being all on the same page. So I use the language early care and education, because we have to acknowledge the fact that in order for people to go to work, they need childcare, quote unquote. So that's a given. So I try to couch it in a way that people will understand. Some people say childcare because they want to make sure it's not education, because education seems too big and serious in numbers and letters. So I can appreciate that. I think the larger cultural question is childcare doesn't get respected as a profession, for instance, and I think that's something big happening in the early childhood world right now. Is people who do early care and education aren't paid as well as public school teachers, for instance. That's a big divide. So how do we help people recognize it's a profession? It is incredibly important. 0 to 3. It's education, because a child's education is just learning about the world. That's all they're doing all the time. So, I think that making sure people understand how important those years are, to me, saying early care and education reinforces that. But I certainly respect that there's a range of diversity and opinion on that issue. So,
moving forward, do you think it's helpful if we are all on the same page? And the other problem is that different services come from different parts of the government. For instance, the model I've seen held up is France, where everything is looked at as education and services start at birth. Would that be a helpful model to look towards?
Maybe. I mean, I certainly don't think we have to recreate the wheel. There are models out there, and I think, even in our little state of Vermont, each area is different. Each region is different. So we were talking about children's integrated services earlier. Our children's integrated services looks a little different here than in other regions. So while I can say it's been very successful in our region, there's some people who would say not so much in their region. So I think that you're not going to please everybody. I do think looking holistically at children and families and that culture, there is a shift that happens from, so in our state, it's the Agency of Human Services and the Child Development Division. And then it goes to AOE, Agency of Education. They are culturally incredibly different agencies in our state government. Very, and I feel that in the field, like, oh, okay, so I don't know if it matters what the model is, as long as people are on the same page. So to the extent that the structures can reinforce the importance of collaboration and the same vision, sure, but we have to get on the same page in other ways too.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's confusing sometimes to people who aren't in the field. It gives people who aren't in the field a sense that the energies and resources are being diffused and not being used as effectively as they can. And I hope we can build that bridge. I think the bridge has to be between AHS and education right through K through college. But in this area, I wonder if it would be helpful if there were more clarity. Yeah.
I would be reluctant right at this moment for early childhood to go under the Agency of Education in our state. There are states where it happppens, where their education oversees even early intervention. So it's possible, but I think there is something different about early childhood sometimes.
And I know that even within the schools, the cultures are different. But I know that's a change that can and probably should happen. And in Putney, we've started it. When Head Start left Putney, a group of us gathered and said we need to have something, and it evolved into the pre-K there in Putney, where the teacher is a contracted salary teacher. I think that's one of the ways we start to bring the field, the profession, more respect. Bring the best people in. We raise quality all over, and that's a big evolutionary jump for a lot of towns, though.
It is. And I'm honored to serve on the Blue Ribbon Commission. That is the Governor's Blue Ribbon Commission on financing affordable, high-quality childcare. Childcare's in the title, I will say, and I still wanted to do it even because of that. Even though, but in the language of the bill, it actually talks about or education too. And I think those kinds of opportunities to research and discuss and have a broad representation of people having input into the discussion are exciting. So I'm hopeful that that commission will result in something that we can move forward on, because it's big.
Has it started yet?
It has started.
Okay.
There have been 2 meetings, one in September, one in October. I was on the phone in October. So, it's really hard to be on the phone, but we're going to be meeting monthly.
Yeah.
I think you were talking a little bit about the confusion on the ground about how resources are spent and what's happening. That is absolutely happening in early childhood systems right now. And it's incredibly frustrating. And if it's frustrating for me, who actually understands some of the puzzle pieces, it makes it really inaccessible to the general public. So, I think it's important to figure out, what do people want to know, how do we work together, and so actually the Building Bright Futures Council in our region, it's the Early Childhood Council. There are 12 of these councils across the state. We've been struggling with this as a membership, and we're going to devote our December meeting to talking about what's going on in early childhood, what do you need to know, and how can you get involved locally. So I would put a plug in for that, because if people are interested and want to know what's going to happen. So what's Let's Grow Kids? What is Building Bright Futures? What's the Early Learning Challenge Race to the Top grant? All of pre-K expansion. There's so many things. So December 9th, it's a Wednesday, 4 to 6 p.m. And we are actually going to have it in the conference room at Holton Hall on the Austin campus. So space is a little limited, but if people are interested in trying to get through the alphabet soup of early childhood, that's one opportunity.
And what we can do is we can get Chad would be the person to get in touch with about that.
He is our Building Bright Futures coordinator.
Yep, so we can get his contact information, put it up on the screen for people.
Good.
Do you think you'll be looking at collaborations? And what I mean is public-private collaborations. It's happening with businesses and schools in other parts of the country. Last year, I had a bill drafted and that got passed in the miscellaneous education bill for after school to create the ability to have public-private partnerships where we can use state money and bring in private money, whether it's foundations or businesses, and pool that together so we can expand the number of children that can get served for after-school learning opportunities, summer learning opportunities. Is that one way you think we need to look?
I think so. I mean, I would hope that would be on the menu of options that the Blue Ribbon Commission would look at, for instance. And, Building Bright Futures is an example of a public-private partnership, theoretically, where it's in statute that it exists, and it's going to rely on private, it's just designated as that kind of partnership. There are models, I haven't looked a lot at them, like social impact bonds, or ways to invite foundations to invest in. If we talk about investing in early childhood, if you invest now, the sort of data shows a 7 to 10% return on every dollar invested in early childhood on the savings in healthcare, or incarceration rates, or whatever those things are. That's a really good rate of return. So I have to think that there are models out there that would work. There isn't more public money. Yep. There's not going to be more money. We might shift the dollars around, but in terms of systems change, how and where money comes from and goes is not necessarily the strongest lever we can pull. We spend a lot of time talking about money, but I have the fortune of participating in the Early Childhood Leadership Institute through the Snelling Center, and that was probably the biggest learning for me. That if I had to pick one thing out, we talk a lot about the money, and the money's important. I'm not saying it's not. But what's more important maybe is the framework for our lens for how we view things, or creative ideas for how we approach our work is actually maybe a more powerful lever. So,
and I agree that early education, later education, I think if people understand and feel a good sense of value, they're ready to spend the money.
I hope so. We have to make the case for the value.
That's been an ongoing challenge, and especially in early ed, when we still, the research is continuing to blossom over brain development. It's not as well known as it could be, but that's one of our jobs now, is to continue to inform people how important brain development is, the architecture of the brain, starting at birth and how exponentially it's growing every day, and how important that is for later in life.
It is. And, I think, sometimes it can be hard as a legislator, for instance, I know, making decisions about where to spend resources, that there are a lot of different people asking you where to spend money. And that value for your investment, I think, has to be one of those filters for answering that question.
It is a challenge. I mean, we hear from all the constituent groups, from childcare, the disabled, the elderly. Those are core groups that I feel really need a voice, and what I hope to provide. But it's a challenge because the pie doesn't get bigger, and the needs continue to grow. And we'll see how we go moving forward. So you mentioned legislator, and here's your legislator. We're taking suggestions, or if you have ideas we want to bring forward, what do you want to tell me and want me to bring to Montpelier?
I do think, clearly early childhood is high on my radar in terms of where to invest and where to look for opportunities, I think, to keep investing. I think the challenge for me is people get labeled as special interests, and then people are lobbying. I'm like, there's got to be a way to do this better. Yeah. So, but I would say continuing our work on children's integrated services is prenatal to age 6. The state is actually working on integrating family services prenatal to 21. I will say that most of the money in that system is at the other end, not in the children's integrated services end. But, so taking that, looking for opportunities like that to integrate services, make them more accessible to people, get people out of their silos wherever you can, whether it's education or human services or wherever, so that we can sort of provide more efficient and effective and friendly services. So
we're talking about the common good.
Yeah.
And I feel like when we all do better, we all do better.
We all do better.
And the common good is that. That's why I used the analogy before about I want the best person available to be educated so they can read my blood pressure accurately. And I'm trying to make that connection from early ed to what happens later in life. And it's important that we remember we are all connected, and that's what we're looking to do.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you for taking the time.
Sure.
If people want to get in touch with you at Prouty, what's the best way to do that?
Well, our phone number is 257-7852. We have a website, winstonprouty.org, and I have an email. It's chloe@winstonprouty.org. So feel free to be in touch.
Great. And thank you for taking the time again, and thank you to the people here at BCTV once again for making this space available for us to get information about what's happening in the community here as we prepare for the 2016 legislative session. Well, until next time, this is Mike Mrowicki from Putney, and thanks again. Bye-bye now.